Good afternoon and welcome to this afternoon's iteration of our Lunchtime Looks lecture series. Thank you all for being here. This is our first public program of the semester related to this exhibition called Mapping Climate Change, the Tempestry Map, Mapping Climate Change, the Knitting Map, and the Tempestry Project. And we're really excited to have today's speaker, Beth Shorrock, here with us today to talk a little bit about her own work in textiles and fashion and what she sees through that lens as she looks at this incredible installation that we have here. Beth is a teaching assistant professor for us here and has an extensive history in design, entrepreneurship, and teaching, has done several important collaborations in Chicago and New York City, and now we're honored to have her here working with our students. She's been an important part of opening or beginning to launch a new retail lab space for our fashion design merchandising students on High Street, where they will be able to sell vintage and handmade clothing, which is an exciting new endeavor that is coming online as we speak. So, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Beth.
Thank you. That was such a great introduction, Heather. Thank you all for coming. One thing I'll just add to the introduction, I have a BFA and an MAT BFA in textiles and MAT in art and design from Rhode Island School of Design, which I think my art education has pretty much made me who I am today, had such a huge impact on my life that I forever am grateful for having gone to an art school. And now I'm forever grateful for being part of an art school. Not that I didn't like being part of the ag school, but this just feels like home. So I'm happy to be here. I just actually had a Zoom meeting this morning with Jules, who is the sort of creative mastermind of the Knitting Map. Over the summer, Heather actually reached out to me and asked if I might be interested in doing a collaboration with my students and the visiting artist, Jules Gilson, when she comes in October. She'll be here in 2 weeks. And so Zooming back and forth with Jules, still hadn't seen the Knitting Map, and just sort of like talking to her and trying to get an understanding of what her perspective was on a collaboration. Bethany is actually one of the students who's part of the collaboration, who wasn't in the meeting this morning because she was here. I'll fill you in. Anyway, we were like discussing a lot about what, she was telling me what the Knitting Map was, so I had a good feel for it, but I hadn't yet seen it. And it kind of all came together for me when I actually did come and see this. And I'll just tell you, I wrote some notes about my initial reaction of first time seeing it in the flesh after talking to Jules. And it's interesting because the things that I see in this are sort of the things that I'm really interested in. Not so much, some of it in my own work, but also very much in tune with the fiber textile artists that I have gravitated to since I've studied textiles many, many years ago at RISD, and how they have influenced my life in general. Maybe not so much what I'm doing now, but in the grander scheme of things, I guess you could say. So the first thing that I felt when I walked in the room was the amount of time that it took to do this, which kind of, I think, is mind-boggling. And then the amount of labor, the collaboration and the coordination of over 2,000 knitters over the course of a year is just phenomenal. So it's more about like the logistics, but then, and the mass scale of it, the ambitiousness of it is something that I am always really gravitated to in terms of any art installation or art piece. But in this case, I was just sort of blown away by the labor, the repetition of use of your hands in order to actually hand knit all of this. The fact that it was mostly older women that were involved in this project, that it says a lot about gender, it's a lot about women's work, about craft, and then also the idea of climate being, sort of the undertone of this particular project. I'm very much interested in sustainable practices. That's one of my core beliefs, and I try to get my students to become much more aware of what's happening in the world. I just came from my Intro to Textiles class, and I know I depress my students every single time they're in class because I talk about how bad the clothing and textile industry actually is. And the last two things that I thought about was the meaning, so the tying to the sustainability. But I also talk a lot so I teach a couple of fashion design classes, and I talk a lot about being sort of in tune with, like, walking around with your eyes wide open, but also sort of being in tune with aesthetic experiences, because I feel like we are so sort of separated from the world because we're always on our devices, that an aesthetic experience can really, like, pull at you from so many different directions and engage with all of your senses, that to me, that is like the most exciting thing about art. And I try to get my students to understand what an aesthetic experience is and how they can, like, pretty much, if they're paying attention, they will be moved. It's like the awe. I love awe. I love to be in awe of something. And I'm trying to get my students to sort of feel that way as well. So I'm just going to go back in time, next one, in time a little bit. Oh, she might be having trouble like I am, or I was. So next slide. Yeah, just don't go too far to the right. That's what I was doing. There you go. So I'm actually from Rhode Island. I did my undergraduate and graduate work at Rhode Island School of Design, which has an incredible textile program. And I was lucky enough during my senior year to get an internship at the Svetlana Rockwell Gallery in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Svetlana is no longer with us, but she was an incredible mentor to me, and I really believe one of the first curators, gallery, art consultants to open up a gallery that was focused on textiles. And I learned so much working with her. I learned how to run a small business. I learned how to communicate professionally, and this is pre-computers. This is like the late 70s. How to correspond with artists and collectors and corporations who are interested in buying art for their lobbies or whatever, and then hanging shows. And I kind of wish Sam was here, because hanging textiles is difficult. I mean, I know from talking to him, this was a massive undertaking. And so I learned also in my own small way how to hang some pretty impressive pieces. Next slide, please. But these are just some of the examples of the artists that we represented. And I don't know how many of you know anything about textiles, but I didn't know that I was in the presence of textile gods at the time. And most of these people are still with us. They've definitely sort of moved on and are creating new and exciting works of art. But when I was in the gallery, Michael James, who was originally from Massachusetts, went on to teach, or is still teaching, I believe, at the University of Nebraska, where there is the Quilt Research Museum, I believe, which he had a huge part in setting up. His quilt, these are massive, and his quilts are just amazing, his use of color. So I got to see a master in color. Ann Wilson teaches at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Very textile, very three-dimensional work. She's actually, some of the work that she's doing now, which I talked about in our meeting this morning, is she'll come into a space like this, and they'll install some kind of a structure, and she'll have, so it's a sort of a performance piece. She'll wrap around 2 or 3 or whatever it is and create sort of this warp, and then it's just dancers will sort of pass by each other as they're building this structure, and it's like just amazing. So it's that like aesthetic experience. It's like for us coming in, and it engages more than one of our senses. So performance, installation pieces I'm really, really gravitated to. Next slide, please. And then this is Bhakti Zeke. These are the people that, it was a long time ago. These are the people I could remember, honestly. There was a lot of incredible artists in this gallery. Bhakti Zeke was originally from Indiana. The thing that impressed me the most about her work is she did a lot with ikat, if you know ikat, where you hand dye all of the warp yarns first, and you use a resist process. And then when you actually warp the loom, the tension of the yarns on the loom, they kind of stretch out of shape, so you get this sort of blurred imagery when you're actually weaving. So she was really sort of the queen of ikat at the time. Her pieces were huge. I remember we were working with the National Fire Protection Association in Quincy, Massachusetts, their corporate headquarters. They purchased one of her pieces. And so you walked in their lobby and you saw one of her gigantic weavings, which was awesome. And then Olga de Amaral is, I forget, she's from Colombia. She's from Bogota. She was very three-dimensional in her use of textiles. She would weave these strips, cut them up, and then she'd gesso them to give them more of a three-dimensional form that would stand away from the surface. And her stuff was just also amazing. Next one, please. And then, so Liz Collins, so this was really interesting. When I was talking to Jules over the summer, she was explaining the knitting map to me, and I hadn't seen it. I was like, do you know who Liz Collins is? And she's like, wait a second. And she gets up, and she goes to her bookcase, because I could see her, and she pulls down her book, the book that she wrote, and she flips through, and there's a chapter on Liz Collins. So not having seen this, but knowing that I was understanding what she was trying to convey to the world with her knitting concept, I sort of revisited what Liz Collins did, because she's also kind of grown into a massive presence in the contemporary art world, and specifically in fiber and textiles and in weaving. Liz also went to RISD. She got her master's there as well, and she stayed on and she taught for a long time, and she actually became a very successful knitwear designer. She started creating these sweaters that looked like moths had eaten them, so they had all these intentional holes, and nobody had ever done that before. And she kind of took, the world by storm, literally, in fashion weeks and fashion shows all over the world. And she realized that that was not the business end of it, the constant having to come up with something new for the public, not necessarily for herself. And I can relate, because that's one of the reasons why I stopped designing clothing, because I was like, I don't even like what I'm doing anymore. So she also, so here's another thing that a lot of textile artists start to think about is, intentionally or not, it is the idea of this being craft. It is the idea of this being women's work. And how do you elevate that? Or in her case, she was pretty concerned with the idea of labor, of working really long days, doing the same thing over and over and over again, and what that does to your body, that repetition of movement. And I always tell my students in my the intro to fashion class, and I'll tell you, everything you're wearing was touched by a human being. This is not an automated industry. We are all wearing something that a person sat at a sewing machine and labored and does labor day in and day out for many, many hours a day to make stuff for us. So Liz sort of took that idea and went in a different direction. Can you click on the left one, and it should go to the video. So she started this thing. Sorry. So she started this performance piece called Knitting Nation in 2005, the same year as this. So that was the other, I was like, oh my God, this is so cool. And it is about that idea of labor and movement and repetition, and then creating what? What is it that we're creating? And she's traveled all over the world giving these performances. She did it for 10 years. She has I think 8 iterations. That was one of the earlier ones. So she gets her volunteers, and then click on, can you go back? And then click on that one. And this is just another one of her site-specific. This one's called H2O. So she started in 2005, and this is one of the last iterations of Knitting Nation. She kind of moved back to weaving shortly after this. But it's just the thing that I love about her work too, when I constantly go back to aesthetic experience, is not in this video, but you can always hear the mechanics of it's a tabletop knitting machine. So I love it when we can connect more of our senses. Years ago, I had a class at RISD, and we were introduced to Howard Gardner, who I can't remember if he graduated from MIT or Harvard, you know, Harvard? So the idea of multiple intelligences, yeah, so that just has stuck with me forever. So textiles, it's tactile. Sometimes it has a really strong smell depending on where the fiber is coming from. And then when you incorporate movement or sound, I just think it's just like the perfect scenario. Okay, so next slide. So what I'm doing, what I've decided I wanted to do with you all is share some of the fiber/textile artists that I've encountered either in the flesh, their work, or have just really admired, that are sort of akin to what Jules is doing in terms of there's a commentary about something that's important to them and important to us, but also they're kind of massive, and they invite you in a way that I think smaller, two-dimensional pieces that hang on the wall don't necessarily do. So the first artist is Ernesto Neto, who so this is the only male in my group of artists. Ernesto, has anybody been to the Contemporary Museum, Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago? I'm hoping it's still there. Okay, so it starts at the ground floor and it goes up the entire stairwell. And Ernesto twists and knots and crochets and does mostly hand work to join all these sort of desperate pieces of either ripped up fabric or fiber or twine or rope or whatever it is that he's using, and creates these environments for people to kind of crawl through and sneak through. But he also includes scent. So he'll use herbs or lavender, uses a lot of lavender in his work, and then he'll put in some seeds and some sand so that it's like this tactile experience, but also a smell. Spices, uses a lot of different spices that have, I think, a lot to do with, he's from Brazil. Seeds are really important in Brazil for art. They're show up quite often in artwork. So anyway, pays homage to his roots, but he also creates these incredible structures. Click on it. It's just a quick, thank you. Hopefully this will work. Is there a? No, there's sound, but you have to click on it. Oh, there's no sound. Well, he just talks about the labor.
Everything comes from a little one after the other.
But this massive structure.
No, we need to live here, so we never know what's going to happen.
That's it. That's done. And then the next artist, who I love, let's see. You got it. Is Shiharu Shinota. I'm sure I'm butchering her name. She's from Japan, but she lives in Germany. And she creates these structures, these environments that are just out of thread and yarn. She uses red. Red is sort of her signature color because she wants to reflect on memory and loss. But she invites people into these spaces. They're very meditative. Depending on how they're lit, the light coming through can sort of transcend you into a whole nother place. They're really absolutely amazing. And one of the quotes from her is that she wants to evoke fragility of the environment and the importance of preserving it. So she's about sustainability or the environment, but not in like a really overt way. I guess it's like sort of, it's like this delicate nature, which I love. Okay, next one, please. I'll have a few more. Sheila Hicks. I don't know if anybody knows Sheila Hicks, but she is like phenomenal. She's still alive. She's amazing. She's probably the most famous fiber/textile artist alive today. She has started as, producing small weavings, but now creates these gigantic environmental pieces. Click on that, please. So it's just a short one.
I don't think I've ever been so challenged by spaces, except in very strange colonial architecture, even with some of the works that I've seen that have been exhibited in different museums in the world. They've never looked better than they look here. It seemed to me that we started building walls to accommodate certain works that I failed to not understand the multiple aesthetic possibilities of working within the space as a given space. You're part of it. It's very livable and exciting. Let's go back to the space and see what happens next. The pressure when you're working with supple materials that you exert helps you to make all kinds of interesting shapes that you can't do with any other material. So these are very animalistic and lively and could be growing in the night. They're very familiar to me because a lot of them contain things that I've worn for special occasions. So memories, wrapping memories. The gamut of responses and the vocabulary is quite large. It's worth trying it out and walking it into a museum and seeing if they're going to throw it out or if they're going to show it. And I'm tiptoeing in the side door, bringing you new proposals. So I can either play a symphony that's a Beethoven symphony that's very dramatic, or I can play a very lyrical flute. So why don't you take everything you don't know yet, what you're going to do with, and repurpose it. Today I would like to read art. Tomorrow I would just like to have fun and see what happens, and it might even become art. Give the material a chance to speak and give it the space.
Thank you. So, Sheila's originally from Nebraska, started traveling extensively when she was a young woman and ended up living in a lot of different places, but ended up living in Paris. She's been in Paris for most of her adult life. She has a huge team of help, which I'm sure you can imagine, but her work is like the idea, again, of women's work or traditional textiles that sit on a wall, constructed on an apparatus for it to be just two-dimensional and sit on a wall or sit on a bed or sit on a body. Like Sheila is one of those artists that really pushed the boundaries of what textile art could actually be. I say textile art because, I don't know, fiber, maybe it's because I teach textiles, fiber to me is always the beginning of the textile, and then it's the fiber, it's the little things, the little component that makes a textile. So that's why I always bounce back to textile. Just my way, and that's, you can go through, that's another example of Sheila's. Okay. And then Magdalena Abakonovitz, I believe is how you pronounce her last name. She's no longer with us. She was really a very contemporary Polish textile artist. So she's a weaver. So these are all tapestry woven structures that she created and then hangs from the ceiling. So the other idea of not having it up against the wall. And when she exhibits, she does multiples of these beautiful hand-dyed, hand-woven structures that sort of like, they're like enveloping, like you can walk inside them, so they're like a cocoon or like a womb. And when she hangs several of them, it's almost like being on a different planet. And these are like the beasts, the beings that are there. I saw one exhibition where they were all black and purple and brown, and they were like hairy beasts. Like you felt like you were seriously like on another, it was like a Star Wars thing. It was like being on another planet. Really, really interesting. But again, pushing the limits and creating these environments that, talking about three, you can go to the next one, it's just one more. The idea of an aesthetic experience or engaging your senses, she mostly uses jute and wool, and they are so pungent. And I love the smell of both of those, so it's like very earthy, which is part of like this whole environment that she's trying to create. And then my last, almost my last, sorry. Lenore Tawney, I think is finally getting recognized as being one of the pioneers of taking that idea of creating something on a two-dimensional apparatus of a loom and pushing the boundaries. I forget where she's originally from, but I know she lived in Chicago for a long time. When her husband passed away, I think she just felt free. It sounds terrible, but she felt free. And she ended up moving to New York. So she started working as a weaver kind of late. I mean, she was in her 40s when she finally decided to embark. She took a weaving class at Penland, and that changed her life. But what she does is she doesn't use the traditional idea of creating a textile that's got structure and it's strong and you can cut it and you can do all these things with it. She wanted to open it up and sort of explore the idea of not having everything on those vertical planes. So next. So she's like one of the first artists to do this. So she started manipulating the warp so she could have more open space and create these like weird diagonals. And then she started creating these three-dimensional pieces that again hung from the ceiling. And when she would show in groups, again, it was sort of creating this incredible environment. But she was like one of the first to actually do this while creating on a very traditional loom. So she is finally getting her due. Go ahead. And this is just one of her exhibitions, recent exhibitions, where you can see how her approach to textiles was just very, very different for the time that she was doing this. Okay. And then the last artist, which I am absolutely positively like in awe of, when I think about awe, is Janet Eckelman, who is from the Boston area. She has a very interesting background. She has a degree in psychology. She has a degree in visual art. She has a degree in environmental design, and she got her master's at Harvard. I'm not exactly sure what the degree is from Harvard, but she traveled extensively. A lot of these artists traveled extensively. And textiles exist in like every culture, and I'm sure that was a huge influence in all their work. But she ended up in Bali, and she was living there for quite a few years. And a little side note, Robert Rauschenberg found her in this weird, obscure place in Bali and saw her painting. She started out as a painter and said, oh my God, this woman is amazing. But she stopped painting because when she was in Bali, she walked the beach every day and she watched the fishermen bringing in their nets. And she was like, I wonder if I could do, like she literally had an epiphany and then started playing with the idea of making netting and then what she could do with it. So click on that. This is the last little video.
Learned about a writing assignment and is getting started. I'll use Grammarly to illustrate how AI can be is a whole nother
Go back to the beginning.
of artistry.
Thank you. Like that. There you go.
I see my work as woven
Oh.
into the fabric of cities. These soft fibers move and adapt to wind and light and rain, and they are a way of being. They are about interconnectedness. I'm Janet Eckelman. I'm an artist. I bring sculpture and form and light
that's it for my little talk. The inspiration is here.
Yeah, so does anyone, thank you so much, Beth. Let's give
Yep.
Beth a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you, Bethany.
Does anyone have any questions for Beth? Or also, she asked me as she was walking in, has everyone seen this? And I said some of you have and some of you haven't. So if you have any questions about the background of the knitting map, either Beth or I are happy to talk about that as well. So any questions anybody has?
My question is, what exactly inspired you to become sustainable? You talked about how the fashion industry is terrible. What
Yep.
what made you come to that conclusion?
So, when I graduated from college, trying to think about the short answer, not the long answer. My husband and I started a clothing company because I had been working for somebody else and was like, no, I can't work for somebody else. And we started a clothing company, and so my background in textiles is fabric printing. And so I knew that I wanted to print the yardage, design the clothing, cut the clothing, and sew it all in-house, which is what we did. And always just gravitated to natural fibers, just innately, because it was, what I had in my closet, mostly. But ironically, our studio was on top of a dry cleaner. And I knew there were days that I couldn't even breathe if the chemicals were so bad. And so I knew that I wanted to work with a textile that did not have to be dry cleaned. It's as simple as that. And so we chose linen. But then linen is very crisp when it comes off the loom, and people don't like it because it wrinkles. I'm wearing linen, and yes, I'm wrinkled, and I don't care. But there's a lot of negative connotations. Not everybody loves linen. And so we were like, well, here's an issue. And it has like a surface to it that we were doing. So we only worked with, so all of our, at the time, all of the inks that we were using, we had to be environmental because we were just basically flushing them through the sewer system. So, and we were on the river, and I don't even know where, I don't even want to think about it right now. But anyway, so we used, in Rhode Island, there was still a lot of fabric printers left in those days, table printers, a table printer 3 miles down the road from where our studio was, and they would give us their sustainable water-based pigments and water-based sodium alginates made from seaweed, and then the pigments were all environmentally friendly. So we were using everything that was really good, but the problem was the surface of linen, depending on what kind of linen you buy, has sort of still a little bit of a waxiness to it, so it acted as a resist to these natural pigments and dyes. So we decided we would pre-wash the linen, which softened it, and then also took away that dry cleaning element. So it was all about our consumer, really. How can we make it easy for them and make our stuff permanent and look good? So this is the beginning of, not a lot of people were doing stuff like that. And then just educating myself, again, being on top of a dry cleaner and understanding the chemicals. I mean, you could buy carbon tetrachloride, which is what dry cleaning essentially is. It will break down wax. You could buy it in the local grocery store in those days. So it was just a different time, but that's how I started. Good question, thank you.
I'm curious, I have a question. Because I teach museum studies courses, and I'm always sort of interested in this kind of what happens to objects when we bring them into a museum and gallery context. And you talk about awe and interactivity and the kind of tactile, and one of the number one commandment of museums is do not touch.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you, especially in light of Jul's piece and thinking like that about the role of kind of our intersecting fields of thinking about textiles in museums or gallery spaces. Was it Nancy Eichelman who was talking about that a bit, and I was curious what you thought about it.
I want to touch everything. I got yelled, I mean, I was at the Andy Warhol Museum with one of my students, and I got yelled at in this space because I always want to touch things. I wish we could, like, so that's the thing, like this in particular, I mean, this is a textile that the whole process and the material is to be worn, is to be touched. So it's kind of like too bad that we can't even just do it a little bit.
Is Karen still in here? Karen's not still in here. Karen had to excuse herself.
But I think that's why some artists, to sort of solve that issue, they infuse scent or sound or some kind of movement to sort of help, because I think that's what makes pieces so memorable too, is if you can, again, going back to Howard Gardner, engage in more than one sense. I don't know, I mean, that's for you to figure out, but.
Well, we do, I mean, increasingly, we were just talking about this the other day in class, increasingly in museum practice, there are things where, you know, you might have tactile kits or things where people can
or
get
even
them.
like a small sample
Right,
that you can
exactly.
touch. Yeah.
And that's increasing. Art museums are very slowly starting to learn from children's and science museums, which have been doing these sorts of practices
Right.
for a long time, but are very slowly starting to, you know, learn that, you know, anything from, you know, textiles to impasto paint, you know, we want to
Yep.
feel what that big chunky globs of paint feel like and things like
Right.
that. So my number one thing is if we tell people don't touch, the first thing they
Right.
want to do is touch.
Of course.
And ceramics artists are the worst. They want to touch everything and see what how the lid was made. So I think it is a conundrum to be solved, but it came up for me as you were talking and listening to some of the other artists. Does anyone else have a question? Jan?
Well, you started by talking about logistics, and with these large pieces, it's sort of amazing to me how on earth they got installed, particularly those last pieces. So I'm curious about this one. When it was installed.
Where's Sam? Is he here?
Well,
He
I was just
talked
thinking,
about it, though.
So is every little bump and curve and fold something that you were doing because of the way the artist wanted it to be done?
Great
So
question.
this is a really great question, and I
Yeah.
do. Sam is actually taking some well-deserved time off. Sam Dame is our preparator who does that. He talks a lot about the invisible labor of museums. He's the one that gets things on the wall, and so he was in large part responsible for this. Whenever an art object comes to us in a traveling exhibition, we get usually a binder, increasingly digital, with installation instructions and notes. And also we do a condition report on things that come in and out, and that's a part of Karen, my colleague's job as well, so that we say this is the condition it came to us in, and hopefully we send it back out in the same condition. The detail and kind of regulations within those instructions varies widely by artist, by organizing institution, and things like that. So sometimes you get, you know, like the minutia of exactly what kind of clip and what kind of thing, and sometimes not so much. I was personally shocked, and I think Sam agreed with me, about how little detail they gave us for such an enormous piece like this. They gave us some kind of like, it's been installed I think 3 or 4 other times in the United States on its current tour that was organized by the Berman Museum at Ursinus College, and it's been installed differently every time. So Sam built this armature across the top to create it going across the corner, and he was built out at 45-degree angles to create the curve. It arrived to us in 4 large pieces, in large boxes that look somewhat like coffins, like about that size, a little bit of a deeper coffin, but about that size. The 4 pieces are not connected in any way.
Yeah.
They are not connected in any way, and it was an intentional choice by our curator, Robert Bridges, to create, so we had no instructions about whether it had to go on the wall or on the floor, whether it had to curve around a corner or be flat against one wall, whether we pulled it completely taut, stretched it completely out. Some of that obviously gets determined by the architecture, But Bob, as a curatorial choice, decided he wanted that kind of flowing undulation pattern to give that kind of topographical sense of a map. So you get that there. And then they got like shark line, like heavy duty fishing line. And it goes through the top of the piece. And then there are little cup hooks, just like tiny little cup hooks that go very frequently so that that there's never any tension on the actual fabric. It's on the shark line. And so that there is never a large amount of weight on any one part. So they're very close together. And what they did is they got in on a lift. Whenever Sam tells the story, I think of like a royal wedding, you know, when the trains are like, so they had Sam up on the lift as the bride, and then 2 or 3 of our colleagues and interns behind him who would kind of slowly unfurl it as it got more and more connected and ready to take the weight. So,
Yeah.
and we got almost no instructions on how it should be done.
It makes sense in a way because you talked about how these pieces are kind of influenced by the environment or trying to be part of the environment. So each environment's going to be different.
Right, exactly. And I think that's part of why there's less, I think we wish for maybe a teeny bit more guidance.
The
But
undulation and is interesting, and maybe everybody in here knows about this piece, but could you just give a real brief explanation of how the colors and the type of knitting does relate to climate?
do you want to take that or do you want me
I'll take what I know.
to? Sure.
Because I do have her book. I just got it. I haven't really had a chance to read through it. But what I know is, so Cork, 2005, it was designated as a city of culture. And so they were approached with grant funding, like, oh, you can do like some cool art stuff. And I'm sure Jules must have written a proposal to get the funding to do this. And so what she was interested in is somehow marking time through the lens of, where did the data come from?
So
Weather station?
Yeah, so she worked with a scientist who took multiple climate data points. So these pieces on our wall that are by a different organization are purely on temperature. This is based on a combination of climate data coming out of Cork that includes wind speed, humidity, precipitation, and temperature. So basically the scientist created a formula that he then put into a computer algorithm that created a scale, right? So if the combination of all those things I just said, temperature, humidity, wind speed, all of those things, if those fall within a certain range on the scale on any given day, then the color equals X.
Yeah.
If they fall within another range, then the color so it's a 26-point scale. And so there are 26 different colors. Do you have another view?
Well,
The type of knitting,
well, that's part of it too, the
color and
the patterns.
I don't know my knitting.
Right,
Yeah.
and so then the other piece
Yeah.
of data that she used, so that was the data that informed color. The other piece of data that she used was human activity, movement, so they were tracking actually using like cameras and stuff through Cork
Like
City.
congestion
Yeah.
would denote a more complicated, intricate pattern. So, yeah,
So like, you know, this last shopping day before Christmas or whatever
Yeah.
would probably be an extremely complicated stitch. And one of the things I always ask my students to think about is what does that have to do with marking time and marking climate data, and kind of thinking about how the density of movement, but also engagement with commerce, buying things at the shop, you know, like I said, before Christmas or things, actually adds a whole chain of different climate effects that are involved with making those goods, getting those to a market, and then purchasing them.
and it was every day for a year with 2,000
Right,
plus
so
knitters.
The wall didactics back there, so there are 2 pictures that actually show the knitting site. They rented out a church basement or church hall and created these little like workstations. And the top of the station had a computer that fed the data. So it had the color and the stitch. So if you look over there, it's got kind of like 2 sides. And then they worked under so that the length of this could, so it just fed under almost like the old printer paper that comes out in a continuous sheet, right? So it was almost like, this is the printer, and it's all coming out like that. And so they worked, and so volunteers would go, and on a given day, they'd cast on if the color needed to change. And so then people would come and work, and there's categories. There's regular knitters, so these were the folks who were coming frequently and were helping doing that kind of like casting on, really knew the data, were doing some of the finishing stitches around the edges and things like that. But then anyone could come and be a part. So there were some people that maybe just came for a day, and they're all credited there.
They got like sailors who came into town off of a ship to come and knit, which no, they taught you. There's a little video of Jules, like all dressed in this crazy knitted outfit, standing on the street corner. People would stop at the light. She'd say, "Hey, do you want to learn how to knit?" And then they would go.
So and these questions, I have also read her book and done some research in preparation for taking people through these exhibitions. But I also think this is a really important plug, because one thing I get asked is like the key or the legend to the scale. Nowhere, anywhere can I find that in any of the research or literature. But Jules is going to be here with us the 14th through 18th of October. She is coming over from Cork, Ireland to do a week-long residency here. On Tuesday, the 15th, she's going to be giving an artist lecture in Block Hall at 5 p.m., kind of our traditional artist talk, where she'll have some slides and talk about her practice. And then on Thursday, the 17th, we're going to do an interactive community event at the Retail Lab space downtown on High Street.
Yeah.
Details, Beth and I are meeting about those details
right now
in 10 minutes.
But it's going to be fun.
Jamie, who manages all of our programs for us, and he's like, "You're adding a new event in 2 weeks, Heather?"
One thing about Jules, I'll just say, she's not a textile artist at all.
She's a performance
She's
artist.
a performance artist. She's a dancer, which is really interesting. And she's a storyteller, but she has such a loves this connection to cloth and stories, because we all wear clothes. We all have memories associated with our clothing. So that's kind of a little bit of what the interactive thing we're planning. Right?
Yes. So stay tuned for information. So the evening of Thursday the 17th on High Street, stay tuned, follow us on our socials. We'll get it up on our website. And but then also her more traditional artist lecture on Tuesday the 15th. So that's our little plug for that.
Can I make one more plug? Yes, please. So the Retail Lab is a student-run retail store, but it's also a gallery, so we'll have art pieces from other creative individuals throughout the community and WVU. But also, it's because we're really steeped in sustainability, it's all going to be secondhand. So if you have anything that you would like to sell in our store, go through your closet, and it will go through a review process, and if we accept it, you get a percentage of the sales. We're actually very generous. And we would love to see like all types of people with all types of really interesting quality garments in the store. We want everybody, we want this to be a community space, not just a student space.
And once again, look out on our socials and our website. That whole Retail Lab space is going to have a dedicated website soon where you can propose if you've got some cool vintage clothing that you'd like to sell. And so look out for Jules on the 15th and 17th. The final iteration of Lunchtime Looks for this semester is going to be with Dr. Eric Herron, who is my co-curator for the Our Votes, Our Values exhibition downstairs on Friday, November 1st. And please remember that if you are a registered Monongalia County voter, you can cast your vote in our Museum Education Center during the early voting period from October 23rd to November 2nd. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, all right.
And this talk will be up on to be viewed.
It will be. It will be.
Yay.
I just want to remember all those wonderful.
Yeah, we had a bit of a lag with getting things on our YouTube, but that is why we have, and thank you to Jason who made all of this video and presentation happen on a short notice. Thank you to Bethany for being our clicker, and we appreciate all of you and I hope to see you at some of these upcoming events. All right, take care, be well.